Now that we've talked about the cost of poor quality, we're going to talk about some other Six Sigma metrics. Now, what's important to remember here first, though, is if we don't measure our process, how do we know if it's improved? What's going to be important at the start of a Lean Six Sigma project is we kind of measure where we are today. So we understand what our goal is and how far we have to go to get there. Now, there's three measurement categories we're going to talk about: time, cost, and quality. Okay, so let's talk about time measurements. One important time measurement is going to be process lead time, the time it takes the process to complete after an order is received. So the total processing time. And that includes value-added activities, things that the customers really care about and they want, as well as non-value-added time. And we're going to try to limit that. An example of non-value-added time is waiting. So have you ever waited at the doctor's office before the doctor saw you? I think we all have. That's non-value-added. Or at a security checkpoint. You've waited in a line and it's just non-value-added. It's not valuable to you, and so it's waste. Now, what we want to do is limit lead time, and often it means we get paid sooner if we do so. So imagine you work for a logging company. So as soon as you start buying the raw materials, the logs for the home, from that point until you get paid, your cash is tied up. And what you want to do is get that cash returned to you as quickly as possible. If we limit lead time, it often means we get paid sooner. So that's process lead time. Then there's process cycle efficiency. It's taking the value-added time in the process and dividing it by the overall lead time, the entire processing. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say you wait 45 minutes for a doctor. That's non-value-added. And then he spends 5 minutes to diagnose your problem. That's value-added time. So the question is, what is the process cycle efficiency? Well, we know our value-added time is 5 minutes. Our lead time, though, it's not going to be 45. That's just the non-value-added time. It's actually going to be 50. It's the overall lead time, so 45 plus 5. So 5 minutes, which is value-added, divided by 50. And so that tells us, or the answer is 0.1, which really means that 10% of the time spent in the process is value-added, which is not a good sign. Let's take another example, and feel free to stop this video if you want to give this a test. The question would be, first, what is the process lead time? And what's the process cycle efficiency? So the lead time is going to be 23.4 minutes, and we're going to add all of these steps, including the waiting. 23.4 minutes from the time the order is received until everything gets finished. And then there's process cycle efficiency. So what we're going to do first is, since we've already identified the lead time, we need to know what portion of that is value added. So if we add the steps A, B, C, D, and E, assuming those are value added steps, if we add those together, we get 13.1 minutes. And so if we take 13.1 minutes, our value added time, and divide it by 23.4, our total lead time, our process cycle efficiency is going to be 55.98%. So of all of the lead time, about 56% of it is value added. Okay, so that's process lead time and process cycle efficiency. Now, we already talked about one of the key cost measurements, the cost of poor quality. That's the financial impact of our defects. And we use this thing called the iceberg model to understand them. We have these visible or hard costs at the top, and then hidden or soft costs at the bottom. And sometimes those hidden costs represent a larger portion of our problem. Now, for now, let's talk about defects, some of our defect measurements. The two key ones are going to be defects per unit and defects per opportunity. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say we manufacture phones. One unit is one phone. Now, let's say within that one phone or that one unit, we have 20 opportunities to mess things up, to fail. There could be a defective battery, a faulty camera, a defective microphone, a speaker that doesn't work, a display that's not responding, and so on. So in that one unit, there's 20 opportunities to fail. Okay, that's going to be important as we talk about these two measurements, DPU and DPMO. Okay, so defects per unit is going to be our defects divided by our units. So let's say that we manufacture 100 phones, and across those 100 phones or 100 units, we have 35 defects. So we're going to say 35 defects divided by 100 units. It's going to be 0.35. Our defects per unit is going to be 0.35. Now let's talk about defects per million opportunities. So if you recall, when we talked about the definition and meaning of Six Sigma, we said that to achieve Six Sigma, we have 3.4 defects per million opportunities or fewer. Okay, so that's kind of why one of the reasons why we're doing this calculation here. But the way it's going to start is with our defects divided by our opportunities. And then we'll multiply that by 1,000,000. So we know that we have 35 defects across those 100 phones or 100 units. Now, remember though, in each phone, there's 20 opportunities to fail. And so we're going to take those 100 phones and multiply it by 20 to get our total opportunities to fail. There's 2,000 chances to mess things up. Okay, so we're going to take 35 and divide it by 2,000, and then take the result of that and multiply it by 1,000,000. So we've got 17,500 defects per million opportunities. And if you recall, because of in Six Sigma, we're trying to achieve 3.4 defects per million opportunities or fewer. We're not quite there yet. We're pretty far off. Okay, one other quality measurement we can look at here is rolled throughput yield. It's the probability that a process will produce a defect-free unit on the first attempt. So what's important here is that as we're producing things, we want to get it right the first time. Every time we mess it up, assuming we identify it, we've got to go back and fix it and correct it. We want to avoid that. We want to get it right the first time. And so rolled throughput yield helps us understand that. So let's take an example to understand this. So let's say we manufacture phones, and we'll keep it simple. Let's say that there's 3 steps here, 3 steps in the process. There's procurement, assembly, and packaging. Okay, so let's look at the procurement step. We know that in this step, there's an 86% of phones make it through this step without a defect on the first try. 86% of phones. That's the yield of that process step. 86% of phones make it through without a defect on the first try. And then in the assembly step, 79% of phones make it through this step without a defect on the first try. That's the yield for that individual process step. And then for packaging, 92% of phones make it through this step without a defect on the first try. Now, those were the individual yields of those steps. Now we want to figure out the rolled throughput yield for the entire process. Now to do that, all we do is take each of the individual yields, 86, 79, and 92 in this case, and multiply them together. Now, what we've got in this case is a rolled throughput yield of 62.5%. Our rolled throughput yield is always going to be less than our individual yields, because what the rolled throughput yield tells us is how likely a phone in this case is to make it through the entire process without a defect on the first try. So 62.5% of phones make it through this entire process without a defect on the first try. And that's what we want. Here's another example. So let's say we've got a process with 7 steps here, and the individual yields for each process step. Feel free, if you'd like, to stop this video for a moment and try to calculate this. Now, if we multiply these all together, in this case, our rolled throughput yield is going to be 76.3%. Remember, that rolled throughput yield is always going to be less than the yields of individual process steps. Just note here, even if our product eventually passes inspection, it's important to consider any rework. Those are costs, quality costs that we have to consider. Here's another way to think about it. We delivered a working phone, but did we have to correct several defects along the way? That's time and money, and we want to avoid that.